Hexed History by Danielle Garrett. Narrated by Amanda Ronconi. 1. It was a place no self-respecting witch and feline familiar should have been. At least not at noon on a Wednesday. Winterspell's favorite watering hole, Merlin's Well, was one of those bars that was like an old shoe, or a worn-out pair of jeans. Comfortable, if not a little dingy, with a familiar feel that enveloped everyone who walked through its doors. My best friend, Liana, managed to talk me into coming out to ladies' night a few times a month, so I guess that made me something of a regular. But on a weekday afternoon, the only patrons in the place thought of it as some kind of low-rent country club, a retreat for magical folks of a certain kind. Generally, old crusty warlocks and wizards who enjoyed sitting around day-drinking their way down memory lane.
"Are you sure you want to do this?"
Selene's tail twitched. Her blue eyes narrowed as she considered the tavern's sign mounted above two thick wooden doors. "It's not that bad, Selene. Besides, the deputy down at the station house told us Sheriff Templeton is inside."
"When is Sheriff Templeton not inside?"
The cat's ears went back.
"Besides, it's easy for you to blow off a dirty floor. You don't have to walk through there barefooted. Bare-pawed."
I rolled my eyes and bent down to pick up the cat. Never let it be said I couldn't take a hint. I deposited the feisty feline on my shoulder and pushed open the heavy wooden door. I paused in the foyer, allowing my eyes to adjust to the relative gloom. The Well's decor tends toward darkly stained wood and old cracked leather. It wasn't dirty, per se, as the tavern's owner, a Scotsman named Jerry, saw to its general upkeep. But between the worn floorboards, the furnishings that hadn't been replaced in at least half a century, and the low lighting, it didn't feel like cleanliness was of the utmost importance. In any case, it wasn't the sort of place where you wanted to set your purse on the floor. Not that anyone complained. If anything, the old salt seemed to like it a bit dark. I heard Sheriff Templeton's sandpapery laugh from across the tavern before I could see him. The mustachioed man held court at his customary spot at the corner table, his gaggle of friends hanging on his every word.
"And that's when this giant shark showed up. I swear it was like something out of Jaws. This big old thing circling us. I could just about hear that music in my head. It brushed up against the boat and sent us sideways. I think old Mickey about wet himself."
A round of laughs echoed across the tavern.
"I've never seen him move so fast,"
the sheriff continued with another guffaw.
"Got that motor started up and didn't even bother pulling in the lines. Bob lost his best fiberglass rod to the dang beast."
I stepped up to the table and cleared my throat. 6 pairs of weathered eyes swiveled my way, and for a moment I felt like I must have sprouted wings and horns. "Excuse me," I said with a pleasant smile. "I don't mean to interrupt your, lunch," though a quick glance revealed there wasn't so much as a crumb of food on the table. Sheriff Templeton and his pals seemed to be all on the same liquid diet. But I was hoping I could borrow the sheriff for a minute or two. Templeton sagged back in his chair as he heaved an exasperated sigh.
"I don't know what there is to talk about, Cora. I already took your report. We both know this isn't the first time your Aunt Lavender has gone off on some adventure."
I took a moment to tamp down a swell of impatience. "She's not on an adventure, Sheriff."
"Yeah,"
Selene interjected.
"Whatever brain cells you haven't drowned in Pabst Blue Ribbon better listen up. I saw a masked intruder carrying Lavender out of her house. She was kidnapped."
Templeton's eyes rolled to the ceiling.
"Oh, good grief. The testimony of an elderly cat admittedly under the influence."
My lips pursed. "I hardly think you could say she was under the influence, Sheriff. It was a memory candle, not hallucinogenic drugs." The sheriff flapped a meaty hand.
"All right, fine. But my point is there's no sign of foul play at her house. No one has called or left a note asking for a ransom to get her back. And as far as either of you know, she didn't have any enemies who would want to hurt her. So, Cora, what exactly is it you would like me and my deputies to do?"
It was a fair question, I supposed, although perhaps not one meant for me. After all, I wasn't a trained detective. Why was it my job to come up with an idea of what steps to take in a police investigation? "She's been missing for 2 months, I continued. "We're all just worried about her, sir." Templeton braced his elbows on the table.
"Have you thought about putting up reward money?"
I bit the insides of my cheeks to keep from screaming. How is that his best solution? I don't know. I suppose I could speak with my mother about it." Selene's chest vibrated against my shoulder as she released a low growl.
"What does the city even pay you for? Does Warden Quinton know you spend your afternoons here in a dark tavern slurping up booze and telling old fish tales while you're supposed to be doing your job?"
That seemed to sober up the grizzled sheriff. He sat up a little straighter in his seat and dropped his elbows off the table's edge.
"I'll send my deputies back to Lavender's house to keep looking for clues and see about scraping together some reward money before we open a tip line. How's that?"
"Sounds like the bare minimum,"
Selene replied. "It's a start," I quickly interjected. "Thank you." I turned my back on the sheriff and his pals. Selene fell silent until we stepped back outside into the bright sunlight.
"A third nipple would be more useful than that man,"
the cat muttered darkly as I placed her on the sidewalk. I shook my head, unsure of what to do. My muscles were coiled up, ready to spring into action, but there wasn't any to take. Ever since we discovered Aunt Lavender wasn't on one of her treasure hunts and had instead been abducted, I'd had a tightness in my chest, a rising anxiety that never seemed to fully dissipate. It ebbed slightly when we were busy looking for clues, but after 2 weeks of searching, we were out of leads. My lips twisted to one side as I ran through the past weeks of searching. "You'd think more people would be worried about Lavender," I said after a long moment.
"Let's face facts, Cora. Lavender isn't exactly the most well-liked witch in Winterspell. She's not the type of witch who likes to make small talk in line at the market or bake cookies for the new neighbors. She keeps to herself, and saying she's socially awkward would be something of an understatement."
I frowned. Aunt Lavender is eccentric, for sure, but I don't think people actively disliked her.
"A lot of folks thought she was nuts. Off her rocker. One sandwich short of a picnic. Bats in the belfry."
"Okay, I get the point, Selene." The pint-sized gray cat stretched her back into a languid arch, the way only felines can.
"And if they didn't think she was crazy, they still found her to be, well, borderline creepy. I mean, what would you think if you caught your neighbor rooting through all the trash bins on a regular basis?"
I blinked. "She'd do that?"
"Oh, yes. Your aunt took the whole one man's trash is another man's treasure thing a little too seriously,"
Selene replied with an indignant sniff.
"She didn't mind getting her hands dirty if she thought she might find some kind of trinket or bauble for her never-ending collection."
Yikes. I exhaled slowly as I scanned the street. Summer had ended, and Winterspell was in something of a slump as the season shifted. In the summertime, the magical town was packed with tourists and out-of-towners who came to vacation or visit from the non-magical world. Things would pick up again in the winter, when the snow started falling and the mountains surrounding the picturesque town would open for winter sports. For now, though, things were quiet and peaceful. It was often my favorite time of year, as my candle shop was a little less busy, and I could cut out early to soak up the last of the season's longer days on the lake. However, right now, even out on the lake, my mind was too loud, my thoughts too rapid. I didn't think I would be able to properly unwind until we found Lavender and brought her home again. Well, law enforcement isn't getting any closer to finding her. I looked over my shoulder at Merlin's well. Sheriff Templeton has clearly already written Lavender off. I guess he figures she'll show up on her own and isn't too concerned if she doesn't.
"Ah, we don't need him,"
Selene's ears went back.
Sheriff Templeton is a bumbling idiot on the best of days. He's not a trained detective. Winterspell doesn't even have one of those.
She was right. The magical community was guarded by enchantments and highly trained sentries. No one from the outside world could get in, save via a single road leading in and out of town. Life in Winterspell could get busy in the peak tourist seasons, but overall it was a safe, quiet little community. The kind where everyone loosely knows everyone else. The residents trust each other. And crime, beyond stupid teenager antics, is basically non-existent. Or at least, it used to be. You really think we can find Lavender, Selene? The cat swished her tail.
Why not? We solved the last case on our own, didn't we? If we'd left that matter to Templeton, your boyfriend would be rotting away in some prison cell waiting for his trial date.
He's not my boyfriend, I corrected the cat, though I couldn't help but smile a little. And we didn't do it all on our own. We had Clint's help, too.
Yeah, he was great for cowering in the corner while we did all the hard work. My point is, we've got this.
I arched a brow. Okay then, Master Detective. What's our next step? Because I was under the assumption we were stumped, hence the need to go and talk to the sheriff. Selene lapsed into silence. I have learned to treasure such times.
Well, we still haven't finished going through the rest of Lavender's house,
she finally said. I groaned in exasperation. Yeah, and there's a reason for that. We can barely keep track of our own rear ends in there. When it came to Aunt Lavender, the term hoarder might not be strong enough. Her bungalow was stuffed to the brim with odds and ends, with only a narrow passageway leading to the different rooms. Selene and I had been working our way through it, but so far we hadn't found anything helpful, and the sheer work of going through everything was beyond exhausting.
I think our best bet is the guest room,
Selene said, already marching down the sidewalk. We can't even get the door open, and the window is painted shut. Seriously, when was the last time Lavender went in there? You used to be her familiar, and even you don't know how she managed to get herself out of there. Selene kept walking, her tail swishing with every other step.
We'll figure something out. For all we know, she's put some kind of spell on it.
Okay. But if we don't even know what the spell is, how are we supposed to break it and get inside? I asked, jogging a few paces to catch up.
I can't think of a solution with all of your yapping. Just drive us there. I'll figure out a way to get inside.
I opened my mouth to argue, but then closed it. As annoying and brash as Selene could be, I had to constantly remind myself that she was just as worried, maybe even more so, as I was about Lavender. She wasn't good at showing her true emotions, and tended to paint everything with the angry brush. Wordlessly, we got into my car and I drove us to Lavender's house on the other side of town. From the outside, you'd never know that Lavender has been missing for 2 months. After numerous complaints from the neighbors and city council, I'd roped my brother Evan into coming over and fixing the place up. Ever since, he's been coming over weekly to cut the grass, pull weeds, and trim down the hedges. He'd even tended to her herb garden. Of course, once you open the front door, that semblance of order goes right out the window. I've never seen what her house actually looks like behind the stacks of accumulated junk she has. She bought the house before Evan and I were even born, and by the time I was old enough to start remembering things, it already looked the way it does now. Selene and I had slowly been working room by room, but we didn't dare to get rid of anything. So it was something like a giant Tetris puzzle. We had to go through stacks of things, only to create new stacks in a slightly smaller space to clear the next row of items to process. Most of it was junk. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of books, old magazines, records, and odd trinkets. She used empty boxes from pantry staples to store smaller items like marbles, crystals, and stones. Near the foyer, there was a stack of Velveeta cheese boxes. And at first, I thought she just hadn't bothered tossing them out, only to find that instead, They were all full of small fossils, beads from broken necklaces, and precious stones. If I didn't know better, I would think that at some point she'd planned to start a jewelry-making business. But upon the discovery, Selene had informed me that each item held some quantity of magic, and Lavender was holding on to them until she could uncover what the exact nature of said magic was. According to Selene, my Aunt Lavender was almost something of a one-woman magical bomb squad. She had her more eccentric quests, chasing after rare things like the horn of the first known unicorn, or Merlin's training wand, or the cursed dagger that killed some famed dwarf king 500 years ago. That sort of thing. But more often than not, she was after smaller, more mundane-seeming trophies. Rumors would swirl about a cursed ring or a hexed book, and away she would go, off to track it down in hopes of keeping it from falling into the wrong hands. Anytime she ran across something with magical properties, be it a set of Russian nesting dolls or a cuckoo clock, she'd purchase it and bring it back to her bungalow for safekeeping. The problem was, she enjoyed the hunt far more than she liked unraveling magical secrets embedded in enchanted or cursed items. That kind of work took precision and patience and focus. Selene told me that Lavender generally only did that part when she needed to sell something. She didn't have a conventional job, so whenever her funds ran low, she would round up items she was willing to part with, dispel the charms or break the curses, and then sell the items at a flea market she frequented in the non-magical world. Judging by the state of her house, she hadn't needed to sell anything for quite some time. Selene moved more easily through the house than I did and reached the door to the guest room first. She ran one paw down the grain in the wood, her eyes falling closed. I stopped in the sliver of hallway and waited, trying to be quiet as she listened. When her eyes opened, she shifted them my way. "Well?" I asked. "Anything?"
I'd say it's definitely enchanted, but I don't know how or why.
Selene sat down and considered the door again, her head slightly tilted to one side.
I don't even know when she did this, or how I failed to notice.
The cat fell silent, and my heart wrenched in my chest. You did your best to help her. I'm sure she just forgot to tell you, got distracted or something. Selene didn't say anything in reply. She just kept staring up at the door. I clasped my hands together in front of me and wrung my fingers together nervously. "We could get the axe from the shed out back," I suggested. Selene's eyes snapped to mine.
Are you insane? If this door has been spelled shut, all you'll manage to do with an axe is slice that pretty face of yours clean off. And I am not cleaning up that kind of mess.
I reached up and brushed my fingertips across my nose. Right.
Just let me think. Go see if we have any more snacks in the fridge.
The cat groused, shifting her attention back to the door. I didn't love that my usefulness was being boiled down to the official snack fetcher, but I did as she asked and wound my way to the other end of the house, to the kitchen. It was the cleanest of the rooms, as we'd been using the dining table as our main workspace, once we'd unearthed it, that is. The kitchen counters were cleared off as well, and after removing all of the spoiled food in the fridge, I'd given it a good scrubbing and then stocked it with some provisions to get us through the long days of cleaning and searching. Selene was beyond picky when it came to her food. But in the nearly 2 months since she'd arrived on my doorstep, informing me she was now my familiar, I'd learned a few of her favorites and managed to keep them on hand. Despite my bank account's protests, the cat had expensive taste. I was just about to open a new canister of chef-prepared, all-natural, organic, no preservatives, free-range cat chow when Selene's voice called out from down the hall. "Cora!" The cat's voice bounced around as she raced to the kitchen. "Cora, it's open!" I abandoned the cat food and hurried to meet her in the hall. What kind of spell was it? Selene had a near infinite amount of magical knowledge, but seeing as she was a cat, her own magical range was somewhat limited. The cat rolled her eyes.
Another one of her riddles. I swear that woman must have been a sphinx in another lifetime.
How did you reveal the clue? Selene padded back to the door, which was now slightly ajar. A series of green runes glowed in the wood casing around the doorway, though the light appeared to be fading.
I used a third eye spell to uncover that which had been concealed, and there they were.
She used the tip of her tail to gesture at the runes. You can read those? I asked, leaning in closer to try and study them before they disappeared back into the wood.
Of course, what do you take me for, some kind of dunce?
Selene tossed her head and slithered into the room.
Honestly, Cora, sometimes I wonder about you.
Right back at ya, I muttered, pushing the door open a little wider to follow her. 2. How could there possibly be more books? Selene scoffed.
Oh, Cora, there can always be more books.
As a bookworm myself, I could appreciate the sentiment, but Aunt Lavender's guest room looked like someone had taken an entire library and shoved it into a 12-by-12 room. The closet doors had been removed somewhere along the way, and the entirety of the reach-in space was stacked, spines out, from floor to ceiling with leather-bound tomes. A row of bookcases spanned the opposite wall, with each shelf packed with scrolls, books, and piles of paper bound with string. Overflowing cardboard boxes were shoved into every other available space, though the books spilling out from them had a layer of dust, suggesting they hadn't been touched in some time. The window straight across from the doorway was not only painted shut, as we'd found when we tried to get in through the outside, but was also blocked by an enormous piece of poster board mounted along the wall, covering all but a tiny sliver of the glass panes. A bit of natural light flowed in from the top edge, but not enough to provide ample lighting for research or reading. Along the poster board were bits and scraps of paper, arranged in columns. "What is all of this?" I asked, still marveling at the barely controlled chaos.
Lavender calls it her research library. I organized it at one point,
Selene said, before sneezing in the dusty air.
Darn it, every time I got it looking halfway decent, Lavender would come through like a freaking hurricane and put it back her way. So irritating. Eventually, I gave up.
I don't even know where to start, I confessed, before taking a few steps deeper into the room. The floor was relatively clear, save for stacks of more books. A desk sat underneath the poster board, and was also surprisingly functional. An antique lamp sat in one corner, and an assortment of pens were corralled into a cup on the opposite corner.
If Lavender's abduction has something to do with one of her zany research projects, we won't make any progress until we figure out exactly what she was looking into,
Selene said, as she took a turn about the room, scanning the books as she went.
We found no clues anywhere else in this monstrosity of a home.
Did you ever tell Lavender how you felt about the mess and clutter? Selene laughed.
Of course. Cora, do I strike you as the type to suffer in silence?
Touché, I mumbled. At least she was self-aware enough to know what a pain in the rear she was. That had to count for something.
Lavender always promised to purge, to do some spring cleaning, hold a yard sale, pare down.
Selene paused and shook her head.
She just doesn't have it in her. So I spent a lot of time outside or away from the house. It's not like she's a terribly good conversationalist. Most of the time I wondered if she'd even noticed I was gone.
I frowned. I'm sorry. That couldn't have been easy. Selene's whiskers twitched.
Well, let's get her back, and then I'll let you take a crack at getting her to clean this place up.
Nodding, I turned to the bookcases and picked up one of the scrolls, only to knock over an entire stack. Muttering a string of curses, I bent over and picked them up from the floor. Selene jumped up onto the desk and peered at the poster board.
Looks like she was putting together a list of things to sell.
More? I asked, turning away from the scrolls quickly before I managed to make another mess. We already found one stack of receipts. I thought you said she doesn't usually sell more than a few things at once.
Normally that's true. She must have been planning a trip, just as I suspected.
Selene's tail swished through the air with an agitated flick.
She's been secretive, more than usual. Keeping this room closed off, barely speaking more than the usual pleasantries each day, closing books when I'd walk into the room.
My brow furrowed. But why hide something from you? You were her familiar. A little pang of guilt nipped into me at the past tense. I still wasn't sure how my aunt would take it when she found out Selene had abandoned her and chosen to bond with me instead. Normally, she wouldn't have come to me until after my aunt's death, as she served as a hearth family familiar, moving from one generation to the next. However, as Selene had explained it to me, Lavender's abandonment of her had created extenuating circumstances, and she'd decided to ditch the rules. We just weren't sure what the consequences would be.
She must have thought I wouldn't approve,
Selene replied.
Lavender sometimes has crackpot ideas, and I was the only one around to tell her she was being ridiculous. Besides her lack of housekeeping skills, it was the thing we quarreled about the most.
So then, can we work backwards from there? What were some of the quests you shot down over the years? Are any of them ones she might have circled back to, or had a hard time letting go? Selene canted her head to one side, still looking up at the poster board, studying Lavender's scrawling handwriting.
It's hard to say. I thought most of her ideas were far-fetched.
I rolled my eyes. Generally speaking, a witch's familiar was meant to be a helper, a confidant, a cheerleader. Selene had somehow missed all of those components. She was helpful at times, but only if the price was high enough. As far as being a confidant, I trusted her, but only to a degree. I cringed every time my mom or brother brought out an embarrassing story from my childhood at our bi-weekly family dinners, because I know Selene was sitting there, absorbing it like a sponge, and would have no qualms about using it at a later date for maximum humiliation. As for cheerleading, let's just say, if given enough time, she could probably make Oscar the Grouch cry. None of her recent clients knew anything about her plans either, I continued. But remember, some of them said she seemed edgy, kind of nervous. I always imagine Aunt Lavender charging in, full steam ahead. But were there any quests or treasures that scared her? Selene considered the question for a moment, then shook her head.
No. Lavender knew how to get herself out of a pickle if need be.
The cat fell silent for a moment, then added,
Until now, at least.
My lips pressed together, as a wave of emotions rolled over me. My hands began to twitch as I looked around the room. Well, I guess putting it off is no use. We might as well get started. I'll start looking through these books. They seem to be the ones she read most recently since they're beside the desk. Maybe you can work on organizing the notes.
Organize them how?
Alphabetically by subject? Or maybe chronologically might be better? I sighed. I don't know, Selene. You said you tried to organize this once before. Why not use the same method?
Alphabetically by subject it is.
Sparks of magic pinged off the poster board as Selene flicked her tail, directing each zing of pink sparks to do her bidding. Soon, all of the notes that had been affixed to the board sat in front of her paws. For all her complaining about not having opposable thumbs, she could get things done when she wanted. I sat down in the chair and began working through the stack of books. Lavender had left more notes jammed into the spines of some of them, and I carefully read each one as I flipped through the various tomes. Although, after the first 5 books, I was left wondering if it might be easier to find things that Lavender didn't research. She had notes covering all different sorts of subjects: the Fountain of Youth, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, the Sword of Damascus, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot. It seemed like if there were any subject, any mystery, no matter how arcane or unlikely, Lavender had at least thought about researching it, at least seriously enough to procure 6 books on the topic. In many cases, she'd out-and-out mounted an expedition. I couldn't follow her notes, as they meandered all over the place, It seemed she didn't care much for chronological order, or any kind of order other than what she held in her head. I got the volumes in order, but found nothing specific enough to help, and decided to go back to the scrolls. This was much harder since she didn't bother with titles. I had to unfurl and read each and every one by hand. A lot of the time, Lavender would flip the scroll over and start an entirely new subject, meaning I had to go over them all twice. Lavender's handwriting was, well, unique, to say the least. I can read cursive, but I'm used to people sticking to either cursive or printed letters. But Lavender didn't seem fenced in by those rules, switching back and forth even in a single word. Many times I would find a number at the top of the scrolls that corresponded to another on a different scroll. This meant that organizing the scrolls by subject proved next to impossible. I tried to separate the scrolls by how likely they were to make people money. I was going over the purported map to El Dorado, the lost city of gold, when I heard Lavender's phone ring. Selene and I froze. No one had called Lavender in some time. On the second ring, I bolted out of the guest room and angled down the narrow hallways formed by Lavender's stacked treasures. "Where's the phone?" I blurted, throwing aside a stack of National Geographic magazines.
"It's in the living room."
"Surprisingly, that's not super helpful right now," I said through gritted teeth, before falling silent in time to hear the next trill. The sound echoed strangely off her piled treasures. I narrowed it down to a corner of the front room that Lavender had filled with different-sized animal skulls, a mounted barn owl, and a murky jar that Selene said contained a preserved dragon heart. "I think it's in here somewhere," I shouted, before muttering to myself as I stepped over a terrarium filled with more animal skulls. Why she calls this a living room when there's nothing living in it, I'll never know. Wait, there it is. Selene trotted over to a cord thrusting out of a mass of spooled yarn. I padded over, but by then Lavender's answering machine had picked up. The boxy thing was something of a fossil itself, a testament to another era. "Lavender, this is Sal," said a gritty voice. "I know you've been dodging my calls, and I know why, too. I know what you did, and I'm about ready to call Warden Quinton and have her personally stop by and pay you a visit. Call me back the moment you get this message." The call ended, and I looked to Selene with confusion. Who the heck is Sal? And what's he talking about? What has Aunt Lavender gotten herself into this time? The cat swished her tail.
Sal is short for Salvatore. Salvatore Greco.
The name sounds familiar. I pursed my lips thoughtfully. I can't put a face to the name, though.
He's a trustee for the International Magical Library Society,
Selene said, with an edge of reverence I'd never heard her use before, which in and of itself was fascinating.
Not only that, but he serves as an archivist for the Arcane Council, she continued. If they need to track down some obscure magical law or code, they call Sal. He's done almost as much research as Lavender has, and he's more organized to boot. Not that it takes much. The cat gave the living room a disdainful sniff. Suspicion brewed in the back of my mind. So what does any of this have to do with Lavender? Are they old friends or something? They go way back, before my time with Lavender. All I know is she sees him every couple of months, more often if she's really stumped.
Why's that? I asked, still not quite piecing it all together.
Look, no matter how much you gussy it up by calling him a trustee or an archivist, it all boils down to the fact that Sal is a librarian. He has access to the entire Arcane Council and their research library. And with his credentials, if there's a book he wants, he can get it. No questions asked.
My brow furrowed. So she borrowed books from him?
Sal's stingy. He doesn't let anyone borrow books. She'd go and use his personal library when she was researching something. But if she wanted to take something home, she'd have to cough up a pretty penny. Sal has something of a side hustle, as the kids say these days.
It sounds to me like they're more than just acquaintances. If he allowed her to use his personal library, that sounds more like they're friends. I glanced at the answering machine. Or were, anyway. He didn't sound too friendly just now.
Yeah, I guess so. As much as Lavender is friends with anyone, I'd say it's more business than anything else.
Well, in any case, it sounds like he's looking for Aunt Lavender, too. Maybe he knows something we don't know? I only waited for a few more moments before motioning for Selene to follow. Come on, let's go.
Where are we going?
To see Salvatore Greco, of course. Selene sat back on her haunches.
One does not simply go and see a man like Salvatore Greco.
I raised an eyebrow at the cat. Why not? Does his house have a moat around it or something?
Of course not. Don't be ridiculous.
I'm assuming you've met him, so he'll know I'm not lying when I tell him who I am. We're looking for Lavender, and he's looking for Lavender. Our interests overlap.
All right, but afterward we're hitting the fish market. It's your day off, and there is no excuse for missing them before they close this time.
Yeah, I said, fishing my keyring from the back pocket of my jeans. 3. We headed back out into the sun and fresh air, a welcome change from the dusty, claustrophobic confines of Aunt Lavender's house. I looked down at the smoky gray cat by my side and stopped short. He does live here in Winterspell, doesn't he? My nervous energy had propelled me out the front door before I fully thought through my plan. Lavender traveled all over the place. It was more than possible that Salvatore lived in some other magical town, or maybe even in the non-magical world. Selene didn't miss a step.
Oh yeah, he's got this monstrosity of a house on the water. Not too far from your oh-so-charming future mother-in-law's place, come to think of it.
I started to object, but quickly decided to save my breath. Selene loved nothing more than baiting me into an argument over something silly. She had petty down to an art form.
He's probably got about an acre, most of it gardens, with statues and oddly shaped topiaries. A big greenhouse, though he doesn't strike me as much of a gardener.
Selene continued at a brisk pace, down the front steps of Lavender's bungalow, and then to wait, not so patiently, at the passenger side door of my car.
Honestly, you're something of a book nerd. You should have become an archivist. Maybe then you could afford something nicer than the shack you live in.
I frowned as I jammed my thumb against the button on my key fob. Shack?
Did I stutter?
Sighing, I dropped into the driver's seat, reached over and pushed open the passenger door, and then closed my own. A gust of air magic was all it took to shut it behind the finicky feline, and within a minute we were backing down the short driveway.
Did I mention that Salvatore has one of those fancy infinity pools?
Selene asked, peering over at me from across the center console.
Maybe you should think about getting a water feature. It might class up the place.
Oh, yeah? Well, there's always that pothole in the driveway that fills up when it rains, I pointed out with a sly grin.
Oh, yes, silly me, the picture of refinement.
Listen, I know you want your own chambers, but it's just not going to happen, Selene. I like my house. The cat twitched her whiskers with a distasteful glower. Besides, I don't need a pool. The lake is within walking distance of my so-called shack, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Selene didn't look convinced. I didn't know why she even cared. It wasn't like she would be running out to use the pool even if I did have one. Sometimes she liked to fuss just to fuss. My phone rang when I pulled out onto the street. I'd slipped it into the mount affixed to the vent fins nearest the steering wheel and could easily see it was Clint calling. With a slight frown, I tapped the red button and sent the call to voicemail before shifting my gaze back to the road in time to stop at a four-way intersection a few houses down from Lavender's bungalow. Selene squinted at the screen. Being nosy was her full-time job, as far as I could tell. She certainly didn't pull her weight at Wicked Wicks.
Clint called?
Yes.
Aren't you going to call him back?
Not this minute, no.
Why not?
I gestured at the intersection ahead of us. We're busy right now, remember? I didn't have an exact address, but if Salvatore's house was near Clint's mother's estate, I had a general idea of where to go. With a sigh, I hit the blinker, then rolled through and made a right turn. Selene placed her paws on the center console and stared up at me.
What's the deal? Is something going on with you two?
I shot her a quick frown before returning my gaze to the road ahead. Why are you being so nosy? Didn't you ever hear what happens to curious cats?
Ha! Even if that sentiment were true, you forget that I can't die. I may be on my 9th life, but I—
Snatch the thread from the fate's hands, yada yada, I know, I interrupted, rolling my fingers through the air. You've mentioned it once or twice. Selene soured and sat back on her haunches. She refused to travel in a carrier or use any kind of safety seat meant for pets. I'd made the suggestion shortly after she'd moved in with me and spent the next week convinced she was going to claw my eyes out in my sleep just for daring to recommend such a thing.
You're deflecting,
the feline replied.
You don't want to talk to Clint, and I want to know why.
Maybe I just don't want to talk to him in front of your snarky self. It's not like you have anything positive or uplifting to say.
Nah, I don't buy that either. Is he into something weird? Did he hit you up in the middle of the night for feet pics?
I gaped at the cat. Selene.
Oh, wait, I know. He's a nerd, right? He wants you to do dress up like Princess Leia in that golden bikini thing with the space buns.
I'm worried he doesn't like me, okay? I blurted. My angry retort hung in the air for a long moment. Selene canted her head to one side, stunned into silence.
That's ridiculous. He's like a little lost puppy around you. Has been since the night he showed up in your shop, remember? He almost bought his mother all of those erotic candles.
She grinned at the memory.
Absolutely hopeless.
I exhaled. I'm worried that he's only using me as an excuse to get away from his current living situation. It can't be easy providing hospice care for your parent, watching them slowly fade before your eyes.
He was falling all over himself to be around you before he even knew about his mother's condition,
Selene pointed out. I'd never expected her to take on the voice of the angel on my shoulder, but I had to admit she had a point. I guess so, I sighed. But that's why he's staying in Winterspell. If not for his mother's condition, he would have left shortly after his brother's murder investigation concluded, and I'd probably have never seen him again.
You don't know that.
We drove over a babbling brook and headed out of Winterspell proper. The pines sighed in the stiff breeze coming off the mountains, mellowing out the heat of the sun. It was a beautiful day, too beautiful to be discussing my relationship woes. All I'm saying is that for the past 2 weeks, the only times we've gotten together, he's fresh off dealing with his mother and stressed out. I don't begrudge him that. I can only imagine how difficult and draining it all must be, but I want him to want to hang out with me because he likes me, not because it's convenient.
If anything, he should be worried about you, Selene countered. For all he knows, you're just with him to get at that fat bank account he keeps referencing.
I snorted. You would think that way, wouldn't you? The thing is, I'm afraid that the only thing keeping Clint in town is his mother. And once she passes, won't he just go back to his big city office?
Perhaps. Have you asked him?
Stars, no. That's the kind of talk you have when things are getting serious. I laughed helplessly. And I guess I'm afraid of things getting serious because I'm afraid of him leaving me and this small-town life behind.
He's not Roger, you know,
Selene said. What?
He's not Roger, your ex-husband. There's no indication he'll behave the same way.
Something burned in my chest, and I quickly swallowed. It's fine. I'm sure it will all work out how it's meant to. I expected Selene to push it, but she fell silent too, only beginning to speak again when we neared our destination. She told me where to turn, and within a few more minutes we were on a blacktop road winding through the pine trees in a gentle, meandering slope. I remarked to myself it would be quite a nice hike, with scenic views of the mountains. Salvatore's manor house squatted firmly on the cusp between elegance and hardy safari base camp. It greatly resembled a mountain resort lodge from the 70s, in all the right ways. I parked in the hairpin drive separating the main manor house from the warehouse-sized garage and adjacent greenhouse. The door to the garage stood partially open, revealing a cascade of highly glossed vintage cars. It seemed books weren't the only thing the man collected. I walked up the steps to his porch and used the brass knocker, shaped like a lion, to announce our arrival. I halfway expected a maid or assistant to answer the door. Instead, a great shaggy bearded man with a balding pate and a smoking jacket flung the door open. His dark, glittering gaze scanned me quickly, then dropped to the cat sitting politely at my ankles. He snorted. "I see. Lavender has taken to sending proxies in her stead? Well, you can tell her it won't work. I know she stole the book, and there is no sum she can offer to entice me to sell it to her. So as I said in my multitude of messages, she can either return it, or she can await a visit from the warden." He started to close the door, and I put my foot in the way. "Wait, Mr. Greco, please, we need to speak with you." "Is the old gal scared of me? Afraid to come and face up to what she's done in person? What an insult, to send a novice witch and a scraggly old cat in her stead."
"Who's scraggly?"
Selene snapped. "Please calm down, Mr. Greco. My name is Cora Harth. I'm Lavender's niece. I'm afraid my aunt has been taken." Salvatore's mouth closed for a moment. "Taken? By whom?" "We don't know, sir. We were searching her house for clues when we heard your phone message." He chewed that over carefully for a moment, and then stood to the side and held the door open. "Please come inside, and call me Sal. Hearing myself referred to as Mr. Greco makes me feel as though I'm in court or something." Salvatore led us through his parlor and up a flight of elegantly shallow marble stairs to the second floor. Expensive wood paneling engraved with woodland scenes lined the corridor, interspersed with oil paintings of pastoral settings. "We can speak in my study comfortably," he said, opening the door and gesturing for us to proceed before him. I walked inside and noticed all the trappings I'd expected. Obligatory wild animal heads on the wall? Check. Giant granite hearth with a roaring fire? Check. Full bar with shelves filled with liquor? Check. Salvatore noticed me looking at the bar. "Would you like a drink?" "No, thank you." I looked at the shelf, noticing many of the bottles were unopened. "Though it does look like you have good taste." Sal smiled sadly. "Thank you. Although, sadly, I can no longer partake of any of it. My doctor has been quite adamant that even the occasional drink could lead to severe consequences."
"Then why do you have so much booze?"
Selene blurted. "Selene, it's fine. I'm not offended. People often don't know what to buy a rich man, what to get for the man who has everything on his birthday. It seems the default is pricey liquor." The study was the epitome of organization, a polar opposite of Lavender's place. Through an archway, I could see Salvatore's personal library. I couldn't keep the impressed look off my face as I beheld its many rows of shelves and books stacked to the ceiling. "I see you've noticed my pride and joy," Salvatore chuckled. "I understand you let my aunt peruse your private library." "Oh yes, on many occasions. Even now there's a couple of university students in there somewhere, doing research." He chuckled. "I do so love to help the younger generation."
"Geez, maybe we should get him to help us organize Lavender's place,"
Selene muttered. "Now," Salvatore said, seating himself behind his desk, where he obviously felt more comfortable. "Tell me of your Aunt Lavender. She's been taken, you say. What's led you to that conclusion?" I pursed my lips in thought, wondering how much I should tell Salvatore. I wasn't entirely sure we could trust him. Selene witnessed Lavender being taken by a masked assailant. This was almost 2 months ago, and no one has seen or heard from her since. "That's simply awful." His brow furrowed in confusion.
It seems like it was only a few days ago that she was here, but I suppose you're right. It must have been mid-July, a warm day.
Do you remember what she was looking into? I asked. We think her research might have had something to do with her abduction.
She was looking for the death mask of Pharaoh Hori III. A cursed item, to be sure. I let her peruse the Odyssey of Oben Amarath in her search.
My brow furrowed. The tome of what now?
Oh, good grief,
Selene sighed.
You'll have to forgive her, Sal. Cora wastes all her magical talents making candles.
Oh, yes, Lavender told me about your shop. It seems very quaint.
He grinned as if at a private joke.
Oben Amarath was a famed alchemist who came to prominence while trotting around the globe in the 1920s. He was as brilliant an explorer as he was a spell worker, and a true lover of puzzles.
You make him sound like Indiana Jones.
I suppose it's an apt comparison. Amarath never had children, but he wanted to leave a legacy behind. An immortality project, if you will. Since his specialty lay in creating magical artifacts, he took one last trip around the world and scattered various treasures from his estate everywhere he went. The tome is the key to finding them.
So the Odyssey of Oben Amarath is like a giant treasure map?
A collection of treasure maps, yes. Most of them have been puzzled out by now, of course. But some of the mysteries still remain unsolved, which makes it a highly valuable book indeed.
Sal's eyes glittered.
How did you get this fancy book in the first place, then?
Selene asked with a dubious glance.
I wouldn't think anyone would want to sell it.
It was a gift from one of my dearly departed colleagues on the Arcane Council. I was most surprised, as was everyone else on the council, as this particular volume had been believed missing for some time.
How much is a book like that worth? I asked.
Well, I would never dream of selling it, you understand,
he said, clearing his throat and casting his gaze downward.
I consider the possession of this tome to be a great responsibility. But, out of idle curiosity, I put some feelers out on the open market. Suffice it to say, one could buy a home such as my own many times over from the sale of one such book.
Aunt Lavender's never cared about money, though. I shook my head. Are you sure she's the one who took it from you? Sal's expression turned steely.
Of course I am. I don't go waving those types of books around for just anyone. I trusted Lavender.
He paused and shook his head once, and I wondered if he was more frustrated with himself or with my aunt.
I showed it to Lavender, thinking it might help her in the hunt for the death mask. Then I was called away to tend to some important business. When I returned, Lavender was in the middle of her work and no longer in the mood for conversation, so I left her alone. Only after she left that evening did I notice the book was gone. And ever since then, I've been trying to reach her to get it back.
Selene and I exchanged a look. Right. Well, look, Sal, we'll keep our eye out for that book, all right? If I find it while I'm cleaning up my aunt's house, I'll be sure to return it to you. A smile creased his face.
That is a most generous offer. I'll be more than willing to reward you for such a service.
No need. If my aunt borrowed the book, I feel it's my responsibility to return it to you. The conversation quickly wrapped up when it became apparent that Salvatore didn't have any idea who would want to kidnap Lavender. He insisted that he hadn't told anyone else about his suspicion that she'd swiped the Odyssey of Oben Amarath. But as he escorted us back to the front door, I wondered if he was telling the truth. He saw us outside and with good grace wished us luck in our quest to find Lavender before waving goodbye. Do you think someone else found out that Lavender had the book? I asked Selene once we were in the car. It would be quite the motive to kidnapping her, if it's really as valuable as he claims. Selene frowned.
I don't know. I need brain food if we're going to try and do any more theorizing tonight.
All right, we can think about dinner.
Call Clint back and tell him we want sushi.
I hate sushi.
I know,
Selene said, her teeth flashing.
That way there will be plenty of leftovers.
4. Sleep was nearly impossible to find that night. My thoughts kept revolving like a motorized merry-go-round that cranked up the speed every few minutes. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my next move. If someone had taken Aunt Lavender because of Salvatore's book, we'd need to figure out who knew she had it. But Sal hadn't been any help, insisting he hadn't told anyone. Lavender might have mentioned it to someone, and as with most small towns, Winterspell had an active grapevine. Though I wasn't sure who would be salivating over rare book gossip. Generally, the things that circulated the fastest were what I like to call soap opera stories. Who was having an affair, whose kid got busted for smoking under the bleachers, who was visiting the local healers for a little cosmetic magic procedure. In a way, that was helpful. There was a smaller handful of people who would care about a valuable book. The problem was I had no idea who those people were. Sure, I went to a book club once a month, but that was more about the chef-prepared snacks, fine wine, and good gossip than the books themselves. Not to mention the books we read, or pretended to read, weren't musty alchemical tomes. I supposed I could go to the library and ask around. Maybe there was a more highbrow book club in town that I didn't know about. Francine, the head librarian, was plugged into the erudite circles both inside and outside of Winterspell. She might have an idea. Of course, it all might be a wild goose chase. The book was the closest thing to a motive we'd uncovered so far, but even still, it seemed fairly weak. If someone found out Lavender had the book, why kidnap her? Why not break in and steal the book when she was gone? Granted, Selene and I had been looking through Lavender's house for the better part of the last 2 weeks and we hadn't come across it. Had her assailant tried finding it on their own and then escalated to kidnapping when they came up empty-handed? Were they keeping her captive until she revealed its location? And if so, why wouldn't she just tell them? What could possibly be in the book that was worth risking her safety or even her life for? Dark thoughts rolled through my mind until I mustered up the strength to banish them. My brain still wasn't tired enough to sleep, though. So instead, it decided to bring up my more personal worries. As Selene had suggested/ordered, I'd called Clint back after leaving Salvatore's house and offered to meet for an early dinner. As I'd expected, he'd had a rough day with his mother and needed an escape. He talked about her over the course of the meal, and while I'd done my best to sympathize, I had a hard time focusing. I think he must have been able to tell, because he excused himself not too long after the bill was paid and didn't press to come to my place for a movie or nightcap. Round and round and round my thoughts spun, until I finally gave up, tossed aside the covers, and got out of bed. It was nearing 4 o'clock in the morning. The sun would be rising in a couple of hours. My shop, Wicked Wicks, wasn't set to open for nearly 4. This gave me a big enough window to go and try to clear my mind. And there was only one place that might help. I dressed quickly, then tiptoed out of the house, careful not to disturb Selene. My house wasn't a shack, as she'd called it, but it was small, and at present the cat slept in a basket out in the living room, which made it hard for me to do much of anything without her noticing. I wanted a cup of coffee, but didn't want to risk waking her up with the grinder and other jostling sounds that it would require. Out in my garage, I loaded my kayak onto the roof of my car and set out toward the lake. It was a short drive, one of the major selling points when I'd purchased the home a few years ago. Well, when my ex-husband Roger and I had purchased it, that is. He was an avid kayaker as well. It was actually how we'd first met, out on the water. Of course, now that we'd been divorced for over a year and a half, that all seemed like it had happened in something of another life. Banishing those memories, I quickly parked the car in the empty lot and lugged my kayak down to the water. After putting on a life vest, I pulled a knit hat over my unstyled pixie-cut hair to fight off the morning chill. There was no doubt the seasons were changing. With an exhale, I slipped my legs into the hull and shoved off with my paddle. The vessel glided over the gently lapping waters of the lake as I settled into a rhythmic paddling. Sometimes it reminded me of a dance, the way the movements felt, with nature's song propelling me along. Although this morning, even the earliest of early birds didn't seem to be awake. I reached the dead center of the lake and closed my eyes, enjoying the peaceful, still silence. All I could hear was the gentle slap of water against the hull of the kayak, the breeze moving through the surrounding trees, and my own heartbeat. Right then and there, my problems seemed so far away, both figuratively and literally. I floated there for a while, and then made a circuit of the lake as the sky began to brighten. The birds stirred awake and began to chirp and trill, greeting the coming sun. I continued paddling, not in a hurry to get to any particular place, and lost track of time, just enjoying the simple pleasure of being on the water. Eventually, my stomach began rumbling, and my need for a caffeine infusion won out, so I paddled back to shore. A few other early morning enthusiasts were arriving at the small parking lot, and I waved to a few on my way back to my vehicle. I loaded the boat back on my car and took off my life vest. Then I extracted my phone and checked the time. 6:30. Still plenty of time before I needed to be at the shop. I decided to text Liana. She may not be a water person, but she is most definitely a coffee person. I knew she would be awake already, probably having just finished her morning yoga flow. So we played text me, text you for a few minutes, hammering out the details, and decided to meet at Dragon's Gold Coffee Company, Winterspell's most popular coffee house. We met outside the coffee house a few minutes later. Liana parked her Toyota Camry and hurried to meet me by the shop's front door. Liana's smile is the type that lights up a room. She's bubbly, effervescent, and her energy is too much for some people to take. I believe we balance each other out well. I find her exuberance refreshing, and she finds my more practical nature grounding. "Hey, you." She beamed a smile and came to embrace me on the sidewalk. She smelled of lavender and sunshine. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said with a slight smile and a shrug as we parted. Liana quirked a perfectly manicured brow at me. "Everything all right? Any news about your aunt?" "Not yet." I shook my head. I'd filled her in on most of the story, from Selene's arrival to the strange vision the cat had after her fur got mixed in with a powerful memories candle. She also knew I'd been spinning my wheels trying to get the Winterspell PD involved. Beyond that, there wasn't much to say. I tugged open the glass door and waited for Liana to go inside first. We took our place in line behind 3 other people who all looked like they could fill in as extras on the set of The Walking Dead as they waited to order their coffee. "I need a distraction," I told Liana. "Tell me what's going on with you. Didn't you go on a date last night?" Liana blew out a sigh. "Oh, just wait until I tell you about this guy. You are not going to believe it." "Oh boy," I said, though I couldn't help but smile a little. Liana's adventures in online dating were always entertaining. "What's the deal with the new guy?" "His name is Tyrone, and he's sweet, funny, cute." "Okay, what's the catch? Does he have an overbearing mother or something?" "Oh no, he lives on his own." "It's not that at all." "Then what is it?" I can't even believe I have to say this, but... She rolled her eyes to the ceiling. "He's an Elvis invoker." "Like he dresses up as Elvis or something?" I laughed. "Does he at least look good in the outfit? Takes a certain kind of man to pull off all those tassels." "Oh, no," Liana said, putting her hand on my bicep. "He's not an Elvis impersonator. He's an Elvis invoker. He summons the ghost of the king to perform at birthday parties and such." "Oh," I blinked. "That's different." "Yeah, so he's constantly making peanut butter bacon and banana sandwiches, and you know the smell of roasting bananas makes me nauseous." I pressed my lips together to keep from breaking out in a giggle fit as we shuffled forward a few paces. I don't even think it's the real Elvis, Liana continued, her expression pained. I think it might be the spirit of an actual Elvis impersonator, but when I asked Tyrone about it, he got all kinds of offended. I honestly thought he was going to ask me to leave. Still stifling a grin, I gave her my best sympathetic look. So what are you going to do? Liana shrugged her slender shoulders. Either break up with him or start wearing nose plugs, I guess. Her eyes sparkled as she continued. Just count yourself lucky you found a man with a real job. How are things going with that most eligible bachelor anyway? Well, things are going okay, but... Uh-oh, there's a but? I sighed. I'm worried that if I get attached, he's just going to leave me when his mother doesn't need him any longer. I sighed. Terrible, right? He's dealing with an ailing parent, and all I can think of is how it's going to affect me. Someone who's been burned once has earned the right to be cautious. We moved forward to our place as the next in line at the counter. Then Liana fixed me with a frank stare. It sounds to me like you and Clint need to have the talk. What talk? DTR, babe. Define the relationship. You need to sit down and figure out where you both stand and what you both want out of the relationship. I don't know. I feel like we might need a talk to talk about whether we should have that talk, I said with a laugh. Liana grinned. I hear you. Although it's worth remembering that he doesn't have to be your Mr. Right. He could just be your Mr. Right now. There's nothing wrong with that. Not every relationship has to turn into something long-term. That's what you said about Grayson. And I'm pretty sure you only kept him around because he was a total neat freak and you wanted to wait to dump him until after he finished reorganizing your pantry. Number one, I only dated him for like half a month. And two, my baseboards have never been cleaner. We shared a laugh, and then stepped to the counter to place our order with the barista working the register. I insisted on paying since it had been my idea to meet up, but Liana slipped a little extra into the tip jar before we moved to the other end of the counter to wait for our drinks. After coffee, Liana and I parted ways. She had to get to work, and I needed to get the shop open for the day. Although, as she was getting into her car, I made her promise to text me a video of the Elvis invoker's routine. If for no other reason than Selene would probably get a big kick out of it. As I pulled into a parking spot a few paces down from my shop, my phone rang. It was Clint. My stomach squirmed as I reached for the phone to answer his call. Was he about to tell me he'd decided he wasn't in a place to get involved with anyone? Maybe we were skipping the talk and moving straight to the breakup. He had been acting awfully weird the night before. I finally answered, just before the call got kicked to voicemail. Hello? Hey, Cora, Clint said. It's just me. Is this a bad time? No, not really, I said, trying not to let my trepidation show in my voice. What's up? Well, I'm actually standing on your front porch with coffee and pastries being stared down by a very angry-looking cat.
Where's my breakfast, you bum?
Selene hollered across the line. Oh, crap, I said with a sigh. I forgot to fill her bowl before I left.
Now it better be served to me in bed,
Selene snapped. I'm sorry about her. I went out for an early morning kayak ride and then Liana and I just went out for coffee. No problem. I should have figured you were busy. I cringed. No, it's okay. Listen, I'll be there in just a few minutes. No rush. I've got Selene to keep me company, he said with a soft chuckle. That's what I'm worried about. I'm on my way. I ended the call and blew out an exasperated sigh as I flipped my car into reverse and backed out of the parking spot. I still had a little time before I needed to be at the shop, but my belly was filled with anxiety as I drove home. That, though, was more likely due to the fact that I didn't know what Selene might be saying to Clint in my absence. She was short-tempered and cantankerous in the best of times, so when she got hangry, well, look out, world. She might blurt something out to Clint just to spite me, as some kind of payback for forgetting to fill her bowl before I left for the lake. Liana's advice ricocheted through my mind one final time as I pulled into my driveway behind Clint's black BMW. As I climbed out of the car, Clint rose from one of the painted Adirondack chairs on my small front porch. He had a drink carrier in his hands, holding a pair of coffee cups, and a brown paper bag was sitting on the small bamboo table nestled between the two chairs. He flashed a smile my way, which I returned as I trod up the steps. Even when he was dressed down, he still pulled off an elegant grace. He wasn't the type to wear ratty t-shirts from his college days or jeans with faded patches or tears at the corners of the pockets. Everything about Clint, from his precise haircut to his choice of footwear, spoke to his wealth. I wasn't sure just how much money he had, but he'd been raised in a wealthy family and now ran a successful consulting business in Chicago. I wasn't able to admire the handsome man for long, as a glowering cat stole my attention while glaring at me from her perch on the flat-topped newel of the porch railing.
"It's about time," Selene groused. "You could have at least left a note."
"I thought you would come and find me at the shop when you got hungry. You know I keep extra food there for the days you sleep in late," I replied, doing my best not to snap at the fussy cat. We both knew that she would have been equally annoyed if I'd woken her up at 4 in the morning when I left the house. And even if I'd thought ahead and filled her bowl, then she would have complained that her food had been sitting out too long and accused me of trying to give her food poisoning. Ignoring her glower, I stepped over to Clint. "This is a nice surprise," I told him with a smile. He shuffled the coffee carrier to one hand and used the other to pull me in for a hug. "I'm glad to hear you say that. I wanted to apologize for the way I kind of bolted on you last night." Frowning, I pulled away and peered up at him. I was a card-carrying member of the Short Girls Club, whereas Clint stood about 6 feet tall and had several inches on me. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't feeling like myself, and
"Can we put a pin in this after-school special till I've had my breakfast?"
Selene interrupted. Sighing, I turned away from Clint and went to open the front door. Selene raced ahead, making a beeline for the kitchen. "I'm sorry about her," I said to Clint as we followed her inside. Clint was a good sport and waited patiently while I attended to my feline lord and master. "You don't need to apologize," he said. "I know it's just Selene being Selene." Selene poked her head up from her bowl and gave him an appraising stare, as though she couldn't figure out whether to take umbrage or not. I smiled wryly at the cat and then turned back to Clint. "Anyway, as you were saying about last night," I prompted. "Oh, right." Clint's soft brown gaze widened. "Well, I mostly wanted to tell you that I know I haven't been the best of companions the past few days. I don't want you to think I'm always this tense and edgy." He smiled softly. "I really can be fun from time to time, believe it or not." I returned his smile. "I know that, and I also understand what you're going through. You're allowed to have off days. I'm a pretty tough chick. I can handle some mood swings from time to time." Clint set the coffee and bag of pastries on my dining table, then reached for me. "Come here," he said, his voice turning sultry. My stomach swooped as he pulled me into his arms, and the doubts and question marks that had plagued me were suddenly gone. He kissed me passionately, and my thoughts ceased altogether. Well, until Selene started hacking up a hairball right behind us. I spent the remainder of the day floating in a happy bubble as I went about my normal routine. Clint stayed at my house long enough to enjoy the coffees and pastries together. Then he went to set up camp at the library, one of the places in town that had a decent Wi-Fi signal and a quiet environment for him to get some work done. After he left, I headed back to Wicked Wicks to open for the day. Selene tried to get on my nerves throughout the day, but I was in such a good mood that it all sort of rolled off me. Clint was coming back over after I got done with work, and I had a feeling it was going to be a very romantic evening. Granted, I might have to lock Selene in a closet in order to fully enjoy myself. The day passed quickly. Things had slowed down considerably from the peak of the summer tourist blitz, but I still had a steady stream of regulars and a slew of custom candle orders that kept me plenty busy. Additionally, I'd switched over to my off-season hours and was able to close up 2 hours earlier than I did in the summertime. Even still, I closed up a few minutes before 6, eager to get back to where the night was heading, and hurried back to my house to change and freshen up before Clint's arrival. "Should I go with the red or the black?" I asked Selene, gesturing down at my feet, one of which was slipped into a black pump, while the other modeled a red stiletto. Truth be told, I wasn't much of a girly girl, and had a terrible time when it came to picking out clothes. I also had a figure that was tough to fit. I was short and curvy, and while I didn't mind the extra padding, it did sometimes make it hard to find outfits that flattered my shorter torso and larger chest without then skewing the other way and making my legs look shorter and thicker. Clint had seen me in the red dress once before, when he'd inadvertently stumbled into a busy ladies' night at the local tavern. He'd been distraught, but even still I remembered the spark in his eyes when he spotted me in the crowded bar. Selene, on the other hand, was not interested in playing fashion show.
"Who do I look like, Heidi Klum?"
I rolled my eyes as I turned around to face my full-length mirror. I lifted one foot, tottered a little, and quickly put it down before I wound up breaking an ankle.
"Now what are you doing? Some kind of flamingo impression?"
the cat asked. "Black it is," I said with an exhale. I'm pretty sure there's a rule about wearing red shoes with a red dress anyway. Liana would know for sure.
"I don't know why you're bothering to go through all of this trouble," Selene said. "This is yet another example of where cats, and the rest of the animal kingdom, I suppose, have it figured out. Mating is much easier when you don't have to go to these lengths."
I cringed. Can we maybe not call it mating?
"What would you like to call it? Knocking boots? Getting frisky? Doing the no-pants dance?"
Selene, enough! I huffed a frustrated grunt as I switched out the red stiletto for the matching black pump. "You know, this is exactly why I want you to make yourself scarce tonight." The cat reared back.
"Excuse me?"
"You heard me," I growled. "I think it would be best if you weren't home when Clint and I get back from dinner."
"I see how it is."
Selene jumped down from the foot of the bed and stalked out of the room, her tail held high. Great. I could already imagine the ways she was plotting to get her revenge.